Hello, everybody. This is Betsy Wuzel, your host of Chatting with Betsy on Passionate World Talk Radio, where we educate, enlighten, and entertain. The views of the guest may not represent those of the host or the station. Folks, you're going to want to listen to my guest because I'm going to tell you you're going to learn a lot. In this world today, we don't know how to grieve. We don't know what to do around people who are grieving. Do you feel uncomfortable around people who have lost someone? Do you feel uncomfortable because you don't know what to say? Do you want to fix that person and make them feel better? I have news for you. You can't fix us. I know, as I lost my spouse. You can't fix me. You can't make me feel better. But there are proper things to say, and there are things that you shouldn't say. And my guest, whom I just love her work, is Heidi Dunstan. She's from Canada, and she is an international best-selling author and certified grief educator. Heidi Dunstan has a passion to help others learn about grief and legacy. Her experience came firsthand after losing her husband unexpectedly in 2018. Dealing with loved ones saying the wrong thing or completely disappearing showed her that many people have never learned to grieve. Heidi believes grief is love and it should never be done alone. Heidi wrote a chapter in a book called Business, Life, and the Universe, Volume 3. I'm going to tell you, folks, I know Heidi's work. I've listened to a master class. Read the blog, because you need to go on Heidi Dunstan's Facebook page, Lean Into Grief, and learn about what Heidi does. Because you know what? People who haven't lost loved ones, especially spouses and partners, I'm going to say this on my personal level here, they don't understand. A lot of people do the book talk, but they haven't experienced it personally. My opinion, I want to hear it from someone who has experienced it personally, because they can relate to me, as they know they've walked in my shoes. And I want to welcome Heidi Dunstan to Chatting with Betsy. Welcome, Heidi.
Thanks, Betsy. It's great to be here. Thank you for having me.
Oh, you're welcome. I just love your work. Lean Into Grief, your Facebook page. You have such pearls of wisdom that I want you to share, because I've been to your master class, I think more than one. And it's so true that people do not know what to say to those who have lost their loved ones. And I felt like when I lost Matt, if someone told me one more time he's in a better place, I wanted to throttle him. Did you feel that way when you lost Mike?
Yeah, when I lost Mike, it was definitely, the circumstances were different. Mike had a massive heart attack, so it was unexpected. But a lot of people, they just didn't know what to say. And so they often, at least he's with God, at least he's, any sentence that started with at least just made me cringe. Or anybody who was trying to find that silver lining. And the reality was, when they were trying to find that, the good thing that could have happened from all of this, it really meant that they didn't see me. They didn't see that the person standing right in front of them, or the person on the other side of that phone line, was suffering. That I was really hurting, and I didn't want to be fixed. I wanted to miss Mike, and I'm allowed to miss him, because I believe that when there's deep grief, it's because there is deep love. And it wouldn't hurt if we didn't love our person. And so, we need to honor that space. And the people around me weren't doing it to be malicious. They were doing it because they didn't know what to say. We live in this world that's so pain adverse. We don't like being in pain. We don't like talking about pain. We don't like seeing people in pain. And so these people that are walking around grieving end up having to do it alone. And that's so tragic, because they're screaming in this world of silence. Their world has gone quiet. Their world has slowed down. And then we have these people that come in and they say things that just miss the mark. And it just means that it pushes them further and further into isolation. And it's the furthest thing that grief needs. Grief is love, and it deserves to be honored and recognized and witnessed. It can be a really beautiful thing when you can sit and hold space for somebody who's crying. Instead of saying, please don't cry, you'll make me cry, say, thank you for sharing your tears with me. I see how much this is hurting you. It can be a really different response. So, these conversations need to be had.
Yes, that's so true. Don't cry. I was even told by someone to stop talking about Matt. Matt's no longer here, as if I need a reminder. And, I should start talking about Matt when I talk about raising awareness for Alzheimer's. That will never happen. Matt was my catalyst. How dare anyone tell someone to stop talking about their loved one? That's really a lot of nerve to say that to someone. And I do believe you're right, Heidi. People don't know what to say. We're not taught about grieving. We don't. There's no role models. And I'm so glad that for people like you, and other people who are teaching the world how to deal with grieving. And I'm very open, just like you are, about my grieving. And I have Josh, my son, and we talk openly about our grieving. I don't hide my grieving from my son. He doesn't hide his from me. And were you told, because this just really drives me nuts, be strong. Why? What does that even mean?
Yeah.
Were you told that to be strong?
I was told to be strong, or that I was so strong. And I encourage people, instead of saying that, see the courage that it takes for a griever to get out of bed. See the courage or how brave they are in putting one foot in front of the other. Because I can tell you, I had many days where a shower was impossible. I didn't feel like I could even do some of the daily living tasks after Mike died. It was difficult. And add that to somebody who's, maybe lost their spouse and maybe has young children. I did my young widows group, and I said to the group of widows, a number of them, I'm like, I don't know how you guys are taking care of these little people. Like, I can barely keep my plants alive. And they're like, we don't know how you're doing it, because we wouldn't get out of bed if it wasn't for the little people. They force us to get out of bed. And I was like, yeah, well, some days I don't get out of bed. And so, it's one of those things where we've never been taught how to grieve. And the hard part is there isn't just a one-stop manual. I believe that grief is as individual as our fingerprint, so none of us grieve the same. And all of the circumstances are different depending on who you've lost. And sometimes, I don't know if you've seen this in some of the work that you do, Betsy, is that somebody loses somebody and then back to back they have losses. They'll lose both parents within months of each other, and then they'll lose a child or another major loss. And so the grief compiles, and it's almost like it's stacking on top of each other. And so who are we to judge what that's supposed to look like? Who is anybody from the outside be able to say, oh, stop talking about them, or just move forward, or it's time to move on, or your grief should be done now? That isn't possible. That is, I will love and I will grieve Mike until my last breath. And that's the reality. Will it look different? Definitely. I mean, you and I have chatted about that before, where grief does change, but it's not over. I will never stop grieving Mike. So never tell anybody they should be over it by now. You're still grieving? I knew one lady who, she was at work and she was having a hard time, and her colleague's like, why are you so emotional? What's going on? She's like, my husband died. And she's like, yeah, but that was like 5 weeks ago. That still bothers you?
Oh, my goodness.
Yes, that still bothers me. You know, he's not on vacation. He's not away from work. He's dead, you know, and people have a really hard time with that, and they just think that, you know, you should do that privately, you know, and that's when it actually needs to be witnessed. That's when we need to see it. When you see somebody grieving, say, I see that you're hurting. I don't know, I don't have the words. Sometimes we don't. There's nothing I can say to you to bring comfort to you losing Matt, Betsy. But I can say I see that it's impacting you. I see that the pain is significant. And I'd like to be with you if you want comfort, if you want somebody around. Because how many of us end up having to do it, grieve in our cars, grieve at home, sneak to a bathroom, because people don't want to see us grieving. And so we go out into this world every day as a griever with our armor on, and yet we're just screaming inside in pain because it hurts. And we don't get to feel seen. And we don't get to, you know, our relationships start to change because people think we should be who we were before, and we'll never be that person again.
So true. That's so true, Heidi. See, folks, this is why I have Heidi on. She just has these gems. It's so true. I mean, my grief is changing. I don't have that deep, heavy sadness, but I will always grieve Matt till the day I die. I will always love and miss him. I'm very open with my grieving on my own Facebook page. I talk about Matt. I show his pictures. I honor his birthday. I honor Father's Day. And, you know, but that's me. And I like that I'm seeing more people honoring their loved ones who have died with pictures, showing pictures, and honoring those special days. Where before it was like, you know, let's hide that person. We can't show that because they're gone. But you know what, Heidi, I look at it this way. You know, Mike lived on this earth. Matt lived on this earth. Why can't we honor them? Why can't we honor their life and say, this is who they were? And, you know, people are afraid to mention the loved one's name because they're afraid we might cry, but we might cry out of tears of joy. You might share somebody might share a beautiful story, an experience they had. I would love to hear stories about Matt, and you know, to honor his memory. I love it when people say, "Oh yeah, I miss Matt. I miss, you know, him making me laugh." I tell people, you know, you can't fix us. We're not asking to be fixed, but just be there and hold our hand or give us a hug. I know with COVID that couldn't happen either, and that was very difficult. But, you know, it's just grief is so individual. My brother died last year, and, you know, my mom's from that age where she doesn't talk about it. Yeah. She just, you know, will not. And that's how she deals with it. But, you know, Matt dying one year, my brother died the next, that was really very difficult for me. Two losses so, you know, close together. And I think, Heidi, people have to know that grief, you're right, it doesn't end. And I found it very awkward. I don't know if you found this, but I found it very awkward when I went back to work. How am I supposed to behave? That's not what I thought. I worked in a preschool, so when parents hugged me and they would say they're sorry, I would start tearing up. And then my coworkers are looking at me, and I'm like, well, you know what? I can't help it. I even had a parent say to me, you know, how are you doing? And I said, well, you know, I'm really tired, and I feel, you know, like I'm exhausted. She goes, oh, I thought you would feel better now that your husband's gone. And I said, well, I spent the last 10 years caregiving, and the last month or two was really hard. People just expect their coworkers to bounce back. I think it's very awkward in the workplace. I think people need to do workshops, really, on dealing with grieving in the workplace. because, do you talk about your spouse? Do you not talk about them? It doesn't have to be a spouse. It could be a parent. It could be a child. What do you have any advice about that, Heidi?
Well, I think there's, there's a few things that you covered earlier. You talked about like the birthdays and the Father's Day and the anniversaries, and I want to say, like, one thing that you can do as somebody who's supporting a griever is note those things in your calendar and reach out to the person. And it doesn't need to be an intense, long text or a phone call. It could just be something as simple as, hey, Betsy, I know it's Matt's birthday today, sending you a hug. Know that I'm thinking about you. Like, just to acknowledge that and to be able to do that years down the road can really touch a griever's heart. I had a friend recently who she works in the grief space as well. Her husband's been gone 12 years, and this last birthday caught her off guard because she was now older than her husband. And she was surprised at how emotional she was, and yet nobody knew that it was his birth, that she was grieving, and that she was hurting, and because it had been so long, and so grief can change and look very different as time passes. My husband died 2 days after Christmas, and next Christmas he'll be gone longer than I had him in my life. And that plays with our heads, that hurts our hearts. And so just being able to see those important days are really important. Even noting the day that the person passed, and reach out and just say, I know this may not be an easy date for you, and I want you to know you're in my thoughts. Can make such a big difference in allowing somebody to know that those hard days aren't forgotten by the people around them. And I think, again, sorry.
Yeah. That's good. Those are great.
I think reaching out and being able to be in contact. And like I said, it doesn't need to be intense. It doesn't need to be, it could be something as simple as, I'd love to share a story about your person if you're open to it. And I always ask first because, some people wanted to share stories with me, and I was in the middle of work, and I was like, I'm about to teach a class right now. I can't cry. Not in this moment, but I'd love to talk with you later, right? And I always ask because that the stories can take us to an emotional state. It doesn't mean that we're sad. It could be the tears of, it's just nice to hear his name. It's nice to hear him being remembered. I just did a talk last week in Canada on legacy and how legacy could be something as simple as planting a flower in a garden and being able to remember that flower was for your mother or your grandmother. It could be that old radio that you play in your garage because that was your dad's or your grandfather's. These are pieces that we use to honor our people, and we have a responsibility to that. And I think the hard part in our society is we've whitewashed death. We don't see hearses anymore. Bodies are transported in white, unmarked vans, and we don't talk about it, and we make it very like it's supposed to just disappear with the person's loss. And that doesn't happen with the people that we love. We are left behind wanting places and spaces where we can still honor them and remember them and feel them and be connected to them. And that means that we need that connection from the people that knew them. And when we can talk about it and feel comfortable talking about it and be okay with the fact that tears might flow, but that tears are just a language of our heart. They're saying things that we don't have the ability to put words to, and say, I see those tears. I see that, Matt's important to you. Mike's important to you. Whoever your person is important to you. Thank you for sharing those tears with me. It can be a really beautiful moment, and it can allow for both people to go, wow, I'm seen. Wow, like I matter. Because if I share my tears with you, that means I see you. I see you as somebody I trust. I see you as somebody who is willing to hold space for me. And if I'm receiving those tears and witnessing them, It's like, wow, thank you for trusting me. Thank you for sharing a piece of your heart with me. It can be really, really beautiful, and it doesn't need to be awkward. It doesn't need to be, oh my gosh, that it's always so heavy when I talk to Heidi about Mike. It's like, no, it's really beautiful. It's love. You know, and when we can see that, it can be such a great gift that deserves to be honored and deserves to be witnessed.
That's so true. I had someone say to me, I don't know if it was you, Heidi, or someone else, that said to me, Betsy, you know, grief is love, and you never have to stop grieving that. I don't know why, and I don't understand why society thinks that after the funeral that life goes on, and life does go on. It's not the same. And that things are back to normal. They're not for the grieving person. And I had to say, in my own experience, Heidi, I didn't really understand grieving until I became a widow. I lost my dad. It wasn't the same as losing my husband. But now that I lost my husband, I understand the grieving. And I understand the pain and missing their physical presence. And this is what I want people to understand who haven't lost anyone in their life. The person who has experienced the loss of someone will always love and miss that person till the day they themselves die. We miss their physical presence. We miss touching them, hearing their voice, holding them. This is grieving, folks. This is real. This is why I love to hear Heidi, and I love to hear what she has to say because she lives it. Okay, it's not just book knowledge from Heidi. She knows. She lives it. She walks with the grief, and she wants to help you walk with your grief. And I can just listen to your words of wisdom, Heidi, all day, because you are a wealth of information. You're welcome. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, it's one of those things where we don't know what we don't know. And
right.
Nobody taught me what to say to somebody who's grieving. And I can tell you that after Mike died, I said some things that missed the mark myself. I'm not perfect. I've learned from experience. I had a gentleman, I was volunteering somewhere, and somebody mentioned that his brother had just passed. And I just said, when did you lose your brother? And he was like, I didn't lose my brother. He died. And I learned, using a person's word, whether it be death or died or passed away or lost, is important. And because otherwise it feels like nails on a chalkboard. Some people, the word died is so harsh, and so I avoid using it with them. But other people, they want that black and white. They need that concrete, and so loss doesn't make sense for them. And I think that when we can actually just sit and listen to people and use their words, it can make a big difference, because oftentimes what happens with grievers is somebody goes, oh, you lost your husband. I lost my grandma. Let's talk about it, because they haven't dealt with their grief. And so when somebody's in that early grief, I can tell you I probably heard so many grief stories as people tried to empathize with me by telling me how they had experienced grief themselves. And in those early days, weeks, and months, I had zero capacity to carry those stories. And so oftentimes I wouldn't even share that I was grieving because I couldn't carry them. And so now, oftentimes when somebody's lost somebody, somebody said recently, a friend of mine lost a father, and I said, losing a parent is significant. And he said, have you lost a parent? I said, yeah, my father passed when I was 17. And he was like, okay, so you get me. And, there's just that mutual understanding, but I didn't need to move into my grief story. I didn't need to have I didn't need to say to them, I understand my dad died too, like as a comparison. And that's kind of how it can feel. You know, I had somebody, I think about just a couple weeks after Mike died, I understand grief. I went through divorce. And it's like, probably not the best example, right?
Right.
So, avoiding that comparison can really make a difference, and just allowing somebody to say, hey, I see you, or just to be able to say, that's a significant loss. You know, it makes a big difference. And then I would say the other question that always gets grievers is, we get asked all the time, how are you? And how are you? The answer is supposed to be good, fine, or okay. And a griever is none of those. And so I avoid using the question because grief leaves you living in the moment. I change the question to how's today? And the answers I get are very different. I get I haven't slept in a few days, or I can barely sleep, or food just, I can't keep it down, I'm not eating, or I'm eating too much, or I'm just exhausted, or I really just miss my person. And the answer changes, and it allows me to see them. It allows me to witness where they're at. You know, I lost 30 pounds after Mike died. And people were like, oh my gosh, you look so good. You've lost so much weight. And I was like, yeah, I'm on the grief diet, so I can't eat more than one meal a day. You know, and it was a gift when somebody said, hey, I see you've lost a bunch of weight. Are you struggling with eating by yourself? And I was like, broke down and cried. I was like, I hate it. I hate eating by myself. It doesn't make sense. And she was like, I'd love to have you over for dinner with my family, or I'd love to bring dinner over to you and have dinner with you at your house. Which would you prefer? And it was just like, it was like the angels from God were singing, because somebody heard me, somebody saw me, somebody didn't go, oh my gosh, your pants fit different. It was, this isn't a good weight loss. like, you know, I see that you must be hurting, because it's got to be hard to be eating by yourself. And it can be that much of a gift for somebody to say that. And say, I miss you. I miss
Yes.
your person. I want to be with you, and I want to be with you right now while you're hurting, not when you're better. Let me walk with you now.
That's so true. That's beautiful. What a friend. I just love what you have to say. In comparison, Heidi, that's so true. I feel that I don't like it when people would say, oh, well, I know how you feel. No, you don't, because you didn't lose your spouse. You did not see your spouse deteriorate for the past 10 years. You have no idea how I feel. And when people who lose a child, for someone to say they know how they feel when they have not lost a child, to me is cruel. Don't tell please, people, audience, do not tell someone you know how they feel when you have not experienced that. And as Heidi said, there's no winners. There's no comparison stories. I cannot say that.
Our stories are the same, Betsy. We've both lost our spouse.
Right.
I don't know how you feel. I don't know the relationship you had with Matt. I don't know the intricacies of what you went through and watching him move through Alzheimer's. I don't know how you feel. I don't. So even when somebody's had the same loss, I can't say I know how they feel, just as they can't know how I feel. It's kind of like comparing a paper clip and and losing a limb. The pain can vary. You know, when you go to the doctor and they say, well, on a scale of 1 to 10, where's your pain level? Well, it's subjective on how somebody handles pain. It's subjective based on what tools you have to move through it. It's subjective based on what you had to endure or deal with, you know, what was said, what was not said. There's so much that plays into it. So even when it is the same loss, I can't say I know how you feel, because I don't.
It's true.
You know, I can say I've lost a spouse, but I can't say I know how you feel, Betsy. it isn't for me to say that. It is for me to witness, to say, I see you're hurting, or I see that your grief is changing. I see that you're finding an amazing way to, advocate on behalf of your experience with Matt and Alzheimer's and trying to make people more aware. I see that you've got this, you're finding pain in your passion, or passion from your pain, and trying to support people in going through, that are having to grieve or move through, these terrible illnesses like Alzheimer's. But I can't tell you how I know how you feel. It isn't for me to say that. And so I avoid the sentence altogether. And I mean, I have a good friend of mine. She lost her spouse to ALS. And that's a terrible disease too, where you watch somebody deteriorate and live in pain, and never once did I say to her, at least he's not suffering anymore.
Oh, yeah, that's another one.
Right?
That's another one, yep.
At least he's not in pain anymore. And it wasn't until she said, it is a relief to not have to watch him deteriorate. And I said, but it must have been so hard for you. I don't jump on the bandwagon. It isn't for me to jump on. That's for her to own and her to be okay with saying. But it isn't for me to dictate or tell where it's at. So, and those are the stories where we know what somebody has. We know that, Betsy, you've been moving through this journey of Alzheimer's as your husband's deteriorated. My friend, we knew that her husband was, deteriorating to ALS. But I often even encourage people, don't ask the cause of death if you don't know, especially in those early days and weeks, because it can be very traumatic. And so I encourage you, just, acknowledge the loss, acknowledge that you miss the person, acknowledge, but, be willing to listen. But I can tell you, don't ask the cause of death, because what happens if that person has died by suicide and the person standing right before you is the one that found them? And they have to relive that moment every time they get asked. I had a gentleman, it's probably about 9 months after Mike passed. Mike was a firefighter. And so I went to the pensioners' dinner where they acknowledge all the losses for the year. And I was sitting at a table, and the gentleman asked who my spouse was, and he knew my spouse. He knew Mike. And he just said, I saw him just a couple weeks before he died at this firefighter event, and he was so happy and healthy, and he was raving about how in love he was with you, and he was just like, and then all of a sudden I got the email that he was gone. And instead of saying what was the cause of death, he said, may I ask what happened? Not tell me what happened, not what happened, may I ask? And because I knew he'd seen him recently, and that Mike didn't look unhealthy, and he wasn't talking about being ill, the gentleman just wanted some answers. And so it was a gift to me to be able to share that with him. But if I didn't know that he hadn't seen Mike, I probably wouldn't have shared it, because it didn't matter. Mike was dead. And so I encourage people, avoid asking the cause of death. Be willing to hear it if they share it with you, but know that the day that somebody has died is a traumatic day. We all can remember 9/11. We all can remember where we were, what we were doing, what we were wearing, everything about that day. It's etched in our being if we were alive during that time. The day somebody that we've loved has died is etched in our being. It won't go away unless we've had severe post-traumatic stress. But so be gentle with people and just say, like, I see you're hurting. If you're unsure, like if it's, if you don't know the person super well, sometimes I will ask if it was an expected loss, especially if it was recent, because that gives me a little bit of information. And it opens the door so that if they want to share, they're welcome to, but it doesn't make them live there if they don't want to be there.
That is great advice, and Heidi, because people always, think, well, what happened, and I think, it's hard to watch someone you love over a long time deteriorate and die, and it's also I think it's more difficult in your situation, Heidi, where you lost your husband unexpectedly. And I think an unexpected loss, a person, might die in their sleep, or they go get hit by a car, maybe a person who's murdered. To deal with the trauma of that, and then dealing with, an unprepared loss. We're never prepared, even when we think we're going to be prepared. When a person dies that we know is going to die, but an unexpected loss to me is just so much more, I want to say traumatic, for lack of a better word. Dealing with that trauma and then dealing with the grieving is to me, it has to be much more difficult. There was a person who worked, in another building. I worked in the preschool, and this person worked in the gym, and she lost her husband unexpectedly. And she felt guilty that she didn't wake him up to say goodbye that morning. So she has his voice. And I hugged her, and I said, I'm sorry about your husband. And she showed me when she went to the grave and this plaque was there, she showed it to me, and she said, I cried when I saw it. And I said, of course you would. I would cry too. And I'm glad she felt comfortable with me to share that with me. And, I don't know if we could ever make people comfortable, but just hug them. I mean, you're at a loss for words. Just hug them. A hairstylist I went to a couple of years ago, she lost her son unexpectedly right after Thanksgiving. And when I went to see her, Matt had just died. And I said to her, Lisa, I'm really sorry about your son. I didn't ask her what happened. And I said, I just wanted to let you know how sorry I am. I will not tell you. I know how you feel because I don't. But I want you to know that, I just wanted to hug you. And I told her I lost Matt, and she said, she was sorry. And we hugged each other, and we both cried. And it was okay. But I didn't want to feel uncomfortable. And I didn't want her to feel uncomfortable with me. And she said that people at work feel uncomfortable around her. She's like the dark shadow. And people telling her, oh, she'll get over it. No, you don't get over it. And from what I hear, I heard the death of a child, that no matter how old they are, is the worst. Is the worst. So please.
David Kessler says, like, when you lose a parent, you're an orphan. When you lose a spouse, you're a widower. There is no name for a parent who loses a child. There's no description for it.
That's right. So I really want to encourage the people in the audience, please do not tell people to get over it, or they will get over it. Or if they're young, they could get married again. Or you could have children again. One child doesn't replace the other. One spouse doesn't replace the other spouse. You can't replace people and children. And I think people need to start understanding this. Heidi, can you give some examples of what not to say to people and what they should say instead?
I have a lot of friends that have very deep faith and deep religion. Death can change that. And so lots of people say, well, they're with God now. Well, the person right before you might be a little angry at God. So I tend to avoid faith-based statements until somebody mentions where they're at with their religion or their faith. Because some people think that's safe. It's like, oh, this person's from my church. And so I avoid things like that. And I just often will say, hey, I'm thinking about you. You know, you've been on my mind. I may ask how I can support them, knowing full well that they are completely overwhelmed, especially if it's in the early days, weeks, or even months. So I often will provide, I will often ask, I'm going to the grocery store. Can I pick up some groceries for you? Or, hey, I'm shoveling snow because I live in Canada. Is it okay if I shovel your walkway? Those things can be quite helpful. And it's amazing how the little things can make a difference. So, you know, my neighbor, I lived in a condominium complex. So we had a big communal garbage can, but I had people staying with me. And lots of times it was different people every few days. So my neighbor was like, please just leave the garbage on the step. And when we walk by, we'll take it for you. And those little things can make such a big difference. You have no idea. You know, lots of people show up with flowers or food. My neighbor showed up with the Costco-sized box of good Kleenex because he knew that was going to be well used. You know, it provided a little bit of levity and also was just a really great grief gift. But I also encourage people, like, instead of just showing up at people's houses, you know, reach out and say, hey, I'd love to bring a meal. There's a great website called mealtrain.com, MEALTRAIN, and you can set up a profile for a person and send out a link, and then people can sign up to bring meals so that somebody doesn't get 17 lasagnas on the same day. And all of a sudden people sign up and they can see what other people are bringing so that they can bring different types of food, which is super helpful. Things to do if you're going to bring food, don't put it in your grandma's vintage Pyrex and expect that you're going to get it back, because, you know, people all of a sudden are like 15 casserole dishes and they have no idea whose is whose because it went in the freezer and it hasn't been used. So put it in something that either you're not expecting back, like a disposable container, or something that, you know, you're not going to expect it back, you know. And then I often encourage people, you know, avoid those awkward conversations where, you know, it feels surface. You know, the people that are standing right before you are hurting, and you can say, you know, I'd love to, when you're ready, have conversation about your person. I'd love to hear some of your memories, or I'd love to share some memories. Make sure it's on their terms. Make sure you ask them, like, let me know when you'd like to talk about it, because they may not like it. Know that things like the grocery store are a minefield for grievers. You know, for some reason, I don't know why, the music they play, it seems like you walk in and it's playing for you. It's the song from your wedding or a song that you guys sang to in the car. And then on top of that, you're pushing your cart past the Oreos, and you don't have to buy Oreos anymore because that was your person's favorite food. And all of a sudden, you know, there's an abandoned cart and the person has fled to the car to cry. You know, years ago, I used to think people just forgot their wallets. After I lost Mike, I learned that it was grievers who something caught them off guard, and they've left half-filled carts halfway through the aisle and had to flee to have a moment in the car. And I encourage you to give people grace. I believe the hard part with grief is because we all grieve so differently, we do it with judgment. We judge people. Oh, why are they crying so much? How come they're not crying at all? You know, why are they doing this? Why do they talk about them all the time? Just let the judgment go. I believe judgment is grief's kryptonite, and it stops us from allowing the emotions to be seen and allowing the person and their emotions to be seen. And so just be gentle and be graceful and let the person be who they need to be today. In that moment, just witness them. And if you do say something that misses the mark, circle back and say, hey, that might have not landed as well as I thought. And I want you to know that you're important to me. I'm sorry that, you know, I just didn't know what to say and it was uncomfortable. And know that the silence is deafening, that when you don't know what to say and you say nothing at all, it is so hard for the person that is wanting to hear from you. So if you don't know what to say that. Say, I'm not so good at this, and I don't want to say the wrong thing, but I want you to know you're important to me, and I don't know what to say. I'm at a loss for words because this person is so important to you or to us and our community that it just doesn't make sense. And if you make a mistake, just own it and say, this is hard. I can tell you, you'll either have a griever if you say something wrong. They will either tell you out front, hey, that was a shitty, oh, my apologies, Betsy. That was a terrible thing to say. That was a terrible thing to say. I hope you edit. That was a terrible thing to say. Or they will suffer in silence. And so know that you can, just circle back and say, I'm sorry. That may not have landed well and it wasn't my intent. And be honest with them. Be okay with the fact that you don't know, and they will appreciate it for the most part. As grievers, we don't know until we've been through it either. And so I hope that grievers can give you the same grace if you can circle back and let them know that they're important to you. So.
Oh, that's great. I'm so glad you mentioned the meal train. We had one from a church we were going to, and Josh is funny. Josh thought the meal train was for the rest of his life. I said, no, yeah. Josh, that's just for a week. Yeah. He loved it. And then when you mentioned, go ahead.
It can be the meal train can be so helpful because, the meal train piece is free, but you can also pay $10 and it can help organize rides. It can help organize errands, or not errands, chores around the house. So all of a sudden, like, leaves need to be raked up, or snow needs to be shoveled, or things need to be fixed around the house. People can sign up and say, hey, I can help with this. And if you sign up for it, do it. Please honor the commitment you made, because it can be extremely hard when people say they're going to show up to fix something and they don't. And it makes that void feel even bigger, that emptiness, be like, I'm even more alone. My husband was the one who fixed everything in the house, and probably 4 months after he died, many things broke, and I didn't know how to fix them. So YouTube and I became friends, but I also had to ask for help. And, there were some people that they said, yeah, I'll be there, and they didn't come for months. And it was really hard. So honor the commitments you make. That's really important. If you can't do something, communicate it. And, just love the person where they're at. Let them be, because they deserve that. They deserve to be able to be seen as they are. They don't need to pretend to be something that they're not.
That's right. That's so true. And I love that you mentioned the grocery store, because now I don't feel alone. There are times when I walk in the grocery store and I see Millimars that Matt loved and double stuffed Oreos, and I would start to cry. And I was like, Matt's not here. I don't have to buy it anymore. I no longer had to buy the party-sized bag of chips. He's not here to eat it. And it does bring tears to your eyes. And I'm thinking, people must think I'm a little cuckoo crying in the grocery store. But it does hit you, and sometimes grief just hits you looking at a box of cookies that your loved one, liked to eat, or a bag of chips that they liked. And then or cereal, and then you realize, well, they're not here anymore. I don't have to buy that anymore. And it does hit you like a ton of bricks, like a sledgehammer sometimes. And it's just weird.
It's a gift for you and your friends, that your friend shows up one day for coffee and says, I want to think about Matt, and I brought us some double stuffed Oreos. Where we can share that space and place with somebody that, after our person is gone, and be able to share that food, right? Just be able to, I'm thinking about Matt today. I'm bringing over a bag of double stuffed Oreos for us to share, or some chips and dip that they would have loved. And, I mean, we use food all the time, Mom's special recipe at Christmas. And, food can be an amazing way to memorialize somebody and remember them. And, we don't really know the impact that those things can make for somebody who's grieving. The smell of a recipe, a cinnamon bun recipe, or the taste of, Mom's pot roast or whatever. It can make such a big difference. So food is a beautiful way to remember, because it gives us taste, it gives us scent. Even making the food or buying the food, it can take us back to times where we get to remember and honor our person. It's really beautiful.
Yes, what I do, special occasions, we buy ice cream. I buy ice cream from the local ice cream shop, and I will get a small cup of Matt's favorite ice cream for Josh and I. Josh will pick out one of his dad's favorites, and I'll get one of Matt's favorites, or we'll pick up a special, like Father's Day. I picked up a Boston cream cake that Matt loved, and it's weird. I picked it up last June, and I started crying because that was Matt's favorite. And I think, Heidi, I will always cry when it comes to some things. And some days I'm good at talking about Matt and not crying, and some days I talk about Matt and I do cry. And I've come to accept it's okay. And
okay.
And you could feel happy and sad together at the same time. And that's okay too. You could be happy and enjoy life, but yet you still have the sadness that your loved one is no longer there. And that's just, I think it's really important for people to validate their feelings and to accept them and not hide from them.
And I think the hard part is we judge and we self-judge. I judge myself lots. Like, why am I crying still? Why is this? It's been a year. Why is this so hard still? And then one night I was watching a show that Mike and I always watched, which was America's Got Talent. And I watched, there was like 2 golden buzzers that show. And I realized, these people are getting the golden buzzer and they're celebrating. And none of the golden buzzer people celebrate the same. Some of them curl up in a ball and cry. Some of them run around the stage screaming. Some of them, you can tell, are having a moment with God. Some of them are just trembling. Some of them jump up and down and are screaming. We never judge how people celebrate, ever. So we don't need to judge when people are grieving or in pain. They are both deserve to be honored. They both deserve to have people witness it. We can be a gift by just allowing them to be who they need to be in that moment and witness it, honor them, hold that space. It can be difficult and awkward because we're not used to it, but it can be extremely honoring and beautiful. And if you want to work, I call it your grief muscle, is see that grief is everywhere. Little kids grieve beautifully. So if you have a toddler and their balloon floats away, or they've lost their pet rock and they're crying, that's grief. Don't tell them, don't cry, you'll get a new balloon. Say, hey, that balloon is important to you. I see that you're sad. I'd like to be with you. Teenagers, if you have a teenager, they grieve beautifully too. Take their internet or their cell phones away, and they grieve a little different than a toddler. They might be a little more angry and a little more vocal, but that's grief. Turn around and say, hey, I see that the internet's important to you. I see that you're upset. And acknowledge their feelings. We see grief all the time. It isn't just with death. We see it with relationships ending, friendships ending. We see it with miscarriages and stillborn births. We see it when people lose their jobs. We see it when there's change in finances. We see it when people retire or go through empty nest syndrome. Grief is around us everywhere. And it is really amazing when we can actually see it and honor people and honor where they're at, so that when we go through some of those tough losses where somebody close to you has gone through a loss, all of a sudden you've worked that muscle and you go, I got this. I have something to say to them that they feel seen and heard and that they're witnessed. And that can make such a big difference.
Yeah, very true. I want to thank you, Heidi, for coming on today. And can you please tell the audience where they can get in touch with you and your Facebook, about your Facebook page and what you have to offer?
So my website is HeidiDunstan.ca, so it's HeidiDunstan.ca. And on Facebook, I'm Lean Into Grief, LeanIntogrifef. Or on Instagram, I'm Lean Into Grief as well. And I got to meet Betsy at in a number of different Clubhouse rooms, and I'm Lean Into Grief or Heidi Dunstan. There's both of them on Clubhouse, so I'd love to connect with you there as well.
Thank you so much, Heidi. Thank you for what you do. The work you do is so important. And whenever you get your book published, please contact me because I'm more than happy to have you on and to promote your book. It needs to be out there.
Thank you so much, Betsy. And thank you for having me on. I hope that there were some nuggets in there for your audience to hear that they could maybe take away from so that we can all grieve with grace.
Oh, definitely there is nuggets there. You are full of nuggets, Heidi, and I want to encourage the audience, run to your computer, your smartphones, your tablets, and look up Lean Into Grief and go on Heidi's website. It will be in the blog, so please read the blog. Listening to Heidi has helped me tremendously, and I just love the work that she's doing. I'm more than happy to have Heidi on again with your book that I feel the world needs to know about. We need to know how to grieve. We need to know how to handle it and what to do for others. So thank you for the work that you do, Heidi. I really appreciate it. And
thank you, Betsy, and thank you for what you do. It's important work.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Folks, if you missed any of this podcast, you can hear it all over again wherever you hear your favorite podcast. Please subscribe to Chatting with Betsy, and you will hear a phenomenal guest. I am on Spotify, Spreaker, Castbox. It's just a few. And please read the blog because it'll have information about Heidi and how you can get to know Heidi and the information and take a master class when she offers it. I want to thank Jeannie White, station manager at Pastoral Talk Radio, who produces the show and writes the blog. I want to thank Lillian Caldwell, CEO of Pastoral Talk Radio, who makes this all possible. And I want to thank you, the audience, the listeners, for listening to the show and sharing this podcast because, folks, we're all hurting. We're all grieving. So, this show, Chatting with Betsy, is about helping other people. And when people share it, you are helping somebody. You don't know who's hurting. We feel like we're the only ones who feel the way that we do, and we're not. I could tell you, I've talked to many people, a lot of people feel very similar, but they think they're the only ones who feel that way, and they're afraid to be judged for it. Let's not judge others on how they feel. Everyone has a right to feel how they do. Everyone has a right to mourn and grieve the way they do. So please don't judge others. And in a world where you can be anything, please be kind. This is your host, Betsy Wuzel, host of Chatting with Betsy and Pastoral Talk Radio. Until we chat again, everyone, be kind. Bye-bye.